welcome. I'm John, and today we are at 3 St. James. This is the headquarters for Berry Brothers and Rudd. We're going to be meeting with Joe Emmett, who's an account manager there. But this place has been around since 1698, and so it was originally a spice and coffee shop, but quickly became the premier wine merchant to the world. We're so close to Buckingham Palace, which is right over there, so it won't surprise you to learn that this is also the royal wine merchant. What's interesting about this is that you are my account rep.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know this story, but when I was introduced to you, it was because of my request to find somebody younger than me so they could handle my transition, my collection when I die. So this is almost certainly like at the beginnings of your time here, I assume.
Yeah, that would have been really early on in my beginning at Berry Brothers.
Yeah.
So I've been here just over a year now. Well, about 18 months, I suppose. But yeah, I think that was right at the beginning.
Yeah, and so you weren't in wine at all when you came in to Berry Brothers, is that right?
I was into wine. This was sort of the second stepping stone into my wine career, basically. As you know, I was sort of in the music industry beforehand, and I came out of that and worked for another company which has a slightly different offering to what Berry's does as a fine wine merchant, and sort of cut my teeth, on the phones in a sort of very sort of telesales type way, but got lots of kicks out of building relationships with customers over the phone, and wanted to take that to having access basically to the world's best products within wine, and then also sort of not just having a relationship with customers on the phone, but being able to meet them in person. And I think that's what ticked all the boxes for me to make the move, and coming to a company that's got so much history.
Yeah, so from your perspective, was it your sense that you were coming to a place that was going to be a little kind of old-fashioned and stodgy, or did they attract you with kind of an energy that surprised you? Just tell me a little bit about that transition when you were meeting with them.
No, I mean, the history part of it for me was exciting, because I think if you're in... Most people that sort of get into wine also have some slight interest in history, because wine has, historical points, in its life. For me, no, it was more to do with how they were continually progressive, held on to the history and the historical roots, but were progressive in opening, our spirits store. So that was fairly new just before I joined. Yeah, it was more about how they were sort of looking to sort of not reinvent themselves, but be innovative, still have all their roots and all that history behind them.
Yeah, I've got to imagine that obviously being in the U.S., we have a very different culture around wine and spirits. There's certainly fun to it. There's probably a lot less history, although we do have some brands, right? Yeah. Jack Daniels and others that we think of as really tied to our culture, Coca-Cola. Yeah. But a lot of the world's wine trade actually flowed through here, which is kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
It's an interesting difference, I guess, for you in looking for a job.
Yeah, exactly. Before you come for an interview anywhere, you look up and you learn about the company and you look at it. And the more I dug around at the history here, and it harkened back to, Napoleon III hiding out in the cellars here, the last ever duel between two people happening in the square behind us here. And you just think, well, they've survived 2 world wars, multiple pandemics and things like that, and yet are still going strong and looking at ways in which they can be progressive and try to attract new clientele.
One of the things that we're really kind of trying to explore here is that obviously Berry Brothers has recently moved into the United States, looking at breaking through into markets, but it's really this kind of issue with younger customers, right? Younger clients. And this is a place that obviously supports generational clients, which I hope in my case will be true, but is maybe less so than 50 years ago. And so off you are trying to find newer, younger clients. What are some of the things that you see that are working? What are some of the things that you see maybe just the wine industry doing generally that you're like, oh, this is a terrible idea?
I think for us, certainly I've noticed with younger or newer collectors coming in, and we have, like you say, we have collectors at all different parts of their journey, from people who've been collecting with us a long time or had cellars handed down to them, maybe aren't in the sort of buying phase, but as an account manager, our job is still to give excellent service in whether they want to sell or drink that wine. And then through to newer collectors who come on board. And I think you can't look past word of mouth and recommendations. I think one of the great things that Berry Brothers does is really leaning into the experiential side of wine. I think that's something that me personally, at my age, I love being part of those experiences with clients. And I know that collectors and clients walk away from those experiences saying, wow, it was so much more than I thought it was going to be. It was more interactive, it was relaxed. And
so what are a couple of examples of that? What are a couple of examples of experiences that you've seen be successful here?
We have lots of events, whether that's paid dinners with the producers or walk around tastings that clients want to come along to. And usually if people are new to collecting, that would be the gateway to the experiences that we offer. I think it's a relaxed environment. You can go around and either taste with your account manager, or you can get face-to-face with the producers, and you're not going to get better information or education than talking to the producer face-to-face and asking them. And it doesn't have to be a science paper sort of quiz for them. It can be as basic as you want, but just having that time to talk to them about the vintage, or what did they like about it, what didn't they like about it. I think in the first case, those sort of walk around tastings are great. And then also, once you've started your collecting journey and you start working out what wines you really like or what specific producers you really like, then I think some of those producer-led dinners and lunches are great, because then suddenly you're tasting back vintages, and if they have single vineyards or different cuvées, then you get the chance to drink them and hear from the winemaker their experience of those vintages, or it may be their father or mothers that made that wine and they've seen it their whole life. So I think those experiences really encapsulate what I think younger collectors are looking for in that experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's this idea that people are drinking a lot less, right? There's just like less alcohol consumption, but it's actually a bigger trend toward people not going out at all. It might be online gambling. It might be marijuana use, which is very popular in the United States because it's legal in most places. And so what happens is people just become socially very isolated.
Sure.
And there is something I think probably special about wine, that it's an excuse to talk to people more than anything else. So I imagine that some of those people are enjoying the experiences just to talk to another human.
And I also think it's about the community that Berry Brothers have built over the 370 years that they've been a business. That's also what people are looking for, to talk to like-minded people at varying stages of their collecting journey. And I know people that have come in as customers, when they come to me and they say, I want to learn more, I want to be educated, I like drinking wine. There's nothing better than sitting next to someone who has been collecting for a year or two, and then someone who's been collecting for 20 years, and then gaining your own insight from those two people and what their experiences are. And I think that's a really key part of building a community of collectors and people who enjoy wine.
There are different types of customers here, obviously. You have something called the cellar plan. Just kind of talk a little bit about how a customer interacts with Berry Brothers here in Europe, and then a little bit about what you're seeing younger people kind of gravitating toward.
We offer collectors a chance to be part of a cellar plan, which has got various different perks to it, whether that's reduced storage costs, you get exclusive access to some cellar plan only offers, and you can pay into your cellar plan monthly. Sort of spreads the cost of collecting wine, and I suppose giving yourself the chance to access some of those more premium products and spreading that cost over however many months by putting money into your cellar plan. And then you get an account manager like myself, and some of my colleagues to help you manage that. And everyone that comes in has different needs or levels of wine knowledge. Like yourself came in, you have great wine knowledge and have been drinking, collecting for some time, but are still open to recommendations. I think built that trust where I come to you with a product I think that is right for your cellar and is the right sort of price point.
That's really kind of the point, which is we're all kind of generally stupid. And in the sense that there's just too many wines for us all to have tasted. You're out there too, like my capacity as a wine store owner, right? I'm tasting for other people. And so you do that too. You travel.
We're very lucky with the long relationships that our buying team and the business has built with the domains, the chateaus, the producers, is that they want to come to Berry Brothers and showcase their products to the team. Weekly, we have people in town showcasing the new vintages. We're constantly able to give first-hand tasting notes to our clients, which I think is really important as well. It's a big part of it. And I think the wider thing here is with collectors that are coming into berries, younger collectors or newer collectors, like tasting it's the only way you find out what you like or what you don't like and how you sort of get your tasting notes better, and it's just tasting, isn't it?
Yeah, I tell everybody too that part of the problem with starting collecting is that you are collecting wines to drink in 5 or 10 or whatever number of years that you feel like is appropriate for that wine.
Yeah.
And you don't really know what it's like. So I guess if you're not involved in a merchant that has a lot of tastings, wine stores that have a lot of tastings, then you're just kind of like collecting wines to later realize that you never wanted that at all.
Yeah. And also I think people's tastes change as well, don't they? Your gateway to wine might be some Bordeaux that you tried once at a friend's or from your parents, and that's your benchmark.
Yeah.
And then you discover Burgundy or Central Otago Pinot Noir and think, oh, actually, that's way more to my taste. And it's about how you guide people through that. And I think tying all those experiences and trying to give people access to taste the products as well is really important.
Those diverging tastes that we all kind of go through our lifetime, one of the kind of cool things about a larger, more well-established merchant here is because obviously you're turnkey and you have BBX. So let's talk a little bit about that, just because it is an interesting offering for both somebody who's collecting or somebody who's looking to extend their collection by buying kind of in-house out of the bonded. They just have to move a case, or maybe they just move a sticker. I don't even know. What is happening? The secret bonded storage.
Yeah, no one's allowed to look behind the curtain.
I think it's interesting. Roughly how many cases are stored at Berry Brothers, and kind of just raw terms so people could understand the
I
the
think
size.
in our sort of temperature controlled cellars and warehouses in Hampshire, don't quote me on this as well, it's in the millions.
So let's talk about BBX. So what does BBX let people do and how does it work?
BBX is our own, I suppose it's a trading part of Berry Brothers, and lots of merchants I think have broking lists where they can literally put things on a list, people can look through it and buy it, whereas this is a bit more interactive and customers can list wines that are reaching maturity or they want to raise some from cash from their cellar, and it's a customer to customer trading platform. You've been collecting for 30 years and think, I don't need all this wine, I can't drink all this wine. Then you come to your account manager, we do a cellar review and we look at, hopefully there's some things in there that have appreciated in value, or it's again coming back to the style of wine. Maybe it's not a style of wine that you want to drink anymore. And so we would list them on BBX, and that really gives clients, again, bring it back to younger collectors or new collectors, the opportunity to buy back vintages that have been stored with Berry Brothers in optimum, perfect conditions. Somebody's done the hard work of laying that down, and then you can have the opportunity to try an older vintage, a back vintage, or plug gaps in your vertical that you may not have, of if you found your favorite producer and you want to create verticals of those wines. Yeah, it's such a good platform.
Take the friction out a little bit, because obviously kind of the olden days of that was you have to auction it yourself and bear the fees of that, but also the time and the expense of moving the wine around. Here it's really just list, click,
buy, click.
Yeah, and it gets moved. It literally gets moved to your ownership within like 24 hours. Yeah. It's that easy.
So going back to younger people, I want to go back to a little bit of younger you. How did you get into wine? Like, what was the backstory there?
My first, I suppose, real career was in the music industry. I was in a touring band for about 10 years, signed to a major record label, toured the world with my best mates, and it was like being on a boys' holiday for 10 years. We did a bit of drinking and exploring wine, and thankfully the lead singer in our band, Matt, is a big history buff, and there would be times when we were on tour and we'd have a day off and everyone wanted to just sort of sit and not really do anything, and he'd sort of whip everyone up to go right, no, we're going to go to this place, see this museum and things, and sort of really encourage that sort of exploration. And then post-pandemic, I had a family and I had some friends that were in the wine industry, and a very good friend of mine, Freddie Bolmer, who's a wine buyer at the Wine Society. I have to give a lot of credit for my sort of wine bug to him, because during the pandemic we would do a little podcast, not dissimilar to what we're doing here, where he would recommend wines for me to go and try, and I'd recommend records for him to listen to. And then the next week we'd talk about it. And then I was thinking during that time, I was like, oh, well, if the band thing doesn't work out, what am I going to do? What's my plan B? So I put myself through the WSET qualifications as a way of not only getting more knowledge and education. I was like, right, I really want to learn sort of the intricacies of this. That then took me to make the decision as actually the wine, I wanted to make a big change in the career, and I started to feel like the passion that I originally had for music I was getting from exploring wine.
Music's still up on Spotify, by the way?
Oh yeah, the Amazons. The band's the Amazon.
This is terrible because I've known you for so long and I've never listened to the music. but music too also has so much in common with wine, right? Oh, yeah. Because these are the two things that trigger memories and emotions. Uh-huh. It's taste, smell, and sound. One thing that I've always really noticed is that people, I think, kind of minimize the memory portion of it, which is almost every great bottle of wine. It's like, oh, I had that with Joe. We were at this restaurant, and kind of the memories around, which obviously has a lot in common with music. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that drew me to it in the sense that, when you discover music and you discover an artist that you like or an album that you like, you listen to it cover to cover, back to front, and then you start digging around okay, well, that's interesting. Fleetwood Mac did this a lot, and Springsteen, they worked on each other's music and with other artists, and you go down rabbit holes, and then you can then experience something else off the back of that album. It's an endless rabbit hole, and I think I got the same, or scratched the same itch with wine, where you have one producer that you try and you like, and then suddenly the brother of the family took himself off to create another domain, and they're making stylistically different wines. I think there's a lot to be said about that. And I also think that winemakers are a bit like the artist or the band, in the sense that they're creating a new album every year, and it's not the same. The conditions are different, and it's not, whilst they're trying to find consistency, they have to start with a blank canvas. And the same is when you make an album. You're not quite sure what direction it's going to go in. You write some songs and you develop them, and you're trying to innovate. So many crossovers.
It is interesting too, because when winemakers are forced to kind of fight through those years' conditions and the things that come around them, from a consumer perspective, what always ends up becoming interesting are milestone years in their lives and how that ends up connecting to wine. Do you even see that with younger wine collectors, as far as anniversaries and children's birthdays and all that?
The greatest hits.
Yeah. My son, who's a 2007, he really has to struggle. And then I have a son in 2005 and a 2016. My life is perfect because of their birth years. Yeah. But that becomes a driver, I would say, probably for a lot of younger collectors especially.
I still think there's that emotional attachment element. We look after varying collecting objectives, and some collectors want to have an investment angle, some want to do it to build a cellar to drink. I think having that emotional attachment is really what drives the passion and you wanting to sort of learn more. And I think those birthday milestones are a great way to have that emotional attachment to a bottle. And I'm sure you've had it with wines where you've got one and you're trying to find the perfect time to open that wine or create an occasion for it, right?
Yeah, and I think that creating the occasion is kind of the right attitude. The typical things that we celebrate with family, obviously the better wines come out. For the U.S., we have Thanksgiving, but certainly Christmas and New Year's. That's like the big ones. But also creating events around it is pretty important. And I think it becomes, a lot of families, you just have the one or two wine people.
Yes, sure,
So part of it's for your own amusement, but I also think that it creates kind of memories for everybody who was there too. If nothing else, it's a trick to keep them hanging out with you just a little bit longer.
They would go to John's house for the nice wine.
Yeah, but I'll pour slowly while I listen to your stories or entertain you. But that I think is pretty typical. So what do you say to the younger collector who says, I want to do investment? Like, what is your approach with them, and how do you help them think that through? Because it's obviously such a difficult topic in reality.
The market has gone through a bit of a correction post the pandemic. We're starting to see some green shoots of recovering. I think cautious optimism is the way to describe it. There was lots of opportunity if you'd started collecting 10 years ago, but I think with the price correction, and this is also where something like BBX really plays into customers who have that objective, you can still find those opportunities amongst BBX, or producers get the release pricing right and you can't find back vintages that are available for cheaper, and it's got great scores. It's a different way of looking at collecting, in the sense that it's our job to go through a bit of a checklist, if you like, of, okay, does it have great scores? Is it priced well comparatively to market on release, or, you know, on the secondary market? Is it a name that has that brand equity that is always going to be desirable no matter what? That's the sort of, I suppose, the basic crux of it. But the opportunities are just different, I think, for investment.
I would suppose that's probably true across age categories too. Older collectors, let's kind of like shift to them a little bit. What are you seeing? Are you seeing collections being passed down? Obviously, that's a European tradition. Or are you seeing them asking you to help them start to liquidate their collections?
I think it's a bit of both. I've certainly had experiences of someone having a sale or passing away, then a wife wanting to carry it on because their husband was so passionate about it, and they will have also become passionate about wine because it's infectious.
Right.
Also, people wanting to liquidate parts of their cellar. Again, coming back to the emotional attachment, and you've built this collection over decades sometimes. There is also an element, I think, of wanting to hold on to something. As an account manager, we have to advise, okay, well, I think it's the right time to sell these wines, or these have still got a long drink window, there's no need to rush with these. It's a real mix, I think. I think the handing down to the sort of younger generation, I don't think I've seen so much of that. I mean, I've only been here just over a year. Some of my colleagues may well have experienced that more.
Yeah, but you have seen the passing to the wife in the immediate family, I suppose, to some degree. A lot of times when you have these experiences and events here, are you seeing people come as couples, or do you more likely see, I would imagine principally it's the husband who's the collector, but I guess sometimes that could very well be the matriarch of the family? What kind of the makeup of that here?
I've certainly had clients bringing work colleagues or friends. Yeah, a real mix. Both different experiences in the sense that if there's a shared love and joy of wine, then of course, you know, someone's going to want to bring their partner along to it. If you're really into wine and then you're working with someone and you go to lunch and they sort of say, oh, no, this is really interesting. And then you think, oh, I'll bring you next to the next berries tasting, or I've got an invite, I'm going to a lunch or a dinner, then you come as my plus one. So yeah, I think it's a real mix.
For the most part, in the US, as in my generation, that would be discovered a little bit more as a couple. Now it might be date night, but I think part of it has to do with this kind of culture of staying single longer, going out more independently, or as we discussed a little bit earlier, staying in as people go out less and less in their youth. They end up discovering wine Do you find a lot of your kind of collectors are a little bit more educated when they're the younger collectors because of whether it's internet research or social media, or they just know a little bit more about the various producers?
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element about that. Many years ago, your wine merchant was the gatekeeper to the knowledge. And whereas now there's so much access to, whether that's pricing on Wine Searcher, whether that's reading multiple articles, there's lots of wine writers, there's influencers, there's this access to information is so much more immediate. I certainly think there's an element of discovery earlier on, if you're that way inclined. Yeah, there's more access to information, basically.
Yeah, it is interesting. The pricing is certainly one of those. Of course, depending on where and how you're purchasing, that's going to vary greatly. Part of that is local taxing.
Yeah.
Part of that is transportation cost. Tariffs, play a factor as well, but also just access to it.
Yes.
So obviously Berry Brothers actually has access, as opposed to maybe a person just trying to hunt down a specific case of wine.
Yeah, I think that's another reason people come to Berries, is that these relationships that we've built over all these years, long-lasting relationships with producers, getting good access and parcels of these wines that we can more or less share them as fairly as we can amongst collectors, and there's definitely that part that attracts people to come to Berry Brothers, I think.
One of the kind of pieces of lore here at Berry's is that this obviously was where the coffee and the spices and kind of all the trade went through London hundreds of years ago. And there's a very famous scale here.
There is.
Which I understand was not just kind of an attraction for all the local people to weigh themselves, but may have been the beginnings of people weighing themselves at all. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. Berry Brothers, for people that don't know the history, was originally a coffee merchants. And the scales that are in our entrance as you walk through were for weighing the coffee. And then as time moved on and people started coming in, I don't know when this point in history switched, but people started to come in and weigh themselves on the scales, and their weights would be noted. And then in those days, if increase in weight was a sign of wealth or that you were eating well, ultimately. But there was a separate book for all of the ladies' weights, which was kept under lock and key in a safe. It was probably the start of people weighing themselves to see how well they were eating.
Now we've come full circle, and here we are hundreds of years later. And so we have Berries to blame or credit for Ozempic. So I
can't put that on record.
That's too far. It's really a place with great history. So I really appreciate you talking to me. Is there anything that if you were to say, hey, wine industry, like the thing that I really, really would like to see more of in order to get people excited, what would that be?
I think we have access, or at least are exposed to music much earlier on in life.
Yep.
And I think this is maybe one of the things about wine, is that you would listen to music if your family were into music. I remember I have some of my earliest memories of my mum and dad listening to Beatles records, and I must have still been in diapers or whatever, and I can remember that. And so I have that memory of music from a very early age. My parents took me and my sister to live music events. So it was sort of drummed into me a little bit. Whereas I think if you don't necessarily come from a family who is wine orientated, it's a much later discovery. Now, I also think that we share music much more freely. If I listen to a record or a song and think, I think John would like that, I would message you, say, John, listen to this record.
Right.
But I think because whilst the wine community is big, I do think this sharing of I had this bottle, or you should try this out. I think there are certain things maybe we could learn from that, especially with my circle of friends, people my age. I have a handful of friends who are into wine, maybe not quite as much as I am or we are. So I think the pool that you're picking from is maybe slightly smaller in trying to create that sharing. I've had this wine, go and pick it up. And then you also have music, more or less, is either free or costs the same.
Right.
Whereas price points in wine are so different, and what someone deems as expensive or premium is different to somebody else. So the ability to actually sort of, I suppose, share those kind of things, it makes it more difficult.
Yeah, I just call that extreme unhinged enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And I do think there's something to that. When people are very excited about music, you tend to listen to it. That is also true of wine. Encourage the unhinged enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely.
For loving something new or trying something on the edge and then sharing that with other people. I think that's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, thanks so much for doing this.
No worries. It's good.
We get to the good part now.
Okay.
Which is I could turn off these cameras, we could start the drinking. This light in particular is making me nutty. So let's do that.